Some other guys and some other girls. This is just some other guy, the 912th some other guy, something guy 912. So I had just watched Wally. Well, not for the first time. I had watched it since first time watching it since quite a few months ago. I was kind of holding back because the whole anticipation of it. Because the first time I caught Wally, previously I didn't seem to care about it. I thought that Wally was kind of a rendition of this older robot from the 80s, so, typical that a remake of something that has become completely irrelevant would kind of bomb. But when I watched it, it was actually an original character, so, and I was watching it in the process of, waking up half asleep, trying to head towards a newspaper class when I was still in high school. And it was kind of like a quarter in, like he if any of you have watched it, he was just inside of the uh, the carrier as this as he was bringing Eve in with the dust storm after the whole the talk they had. And what was strange, that despite that I missed a quarter of it, I was already into the story right there. Like, everything else about that quarter of the story didn't need to be re-explained in that part. And best thing of all, it wasn't explained through exposition or dialogue. Now, I get a lot. I see a lot of reviews and people who complain that the movie has little to no dialogue, thus meaning that there's no plot or narrative. But apparently, these mouth breathers have to have some bored narrator giving them long, tired exposition in the form of dialogue. Because that was usually the tendency with a lot of these movies as of late, that they give you the exposition, and since it usually comes into the perspective of just one person in that role, it's almost seems a little biased because they're not omniscient. They don't know everything, and even if the narrator is omniscient, you can't feel the relation with that person because they're not wholesome to it. They're not part of it. They're just out there. They are divine and unnatural from these events. Not even specifically experiencing them, trying to tell you about it. This has nothing to do with Jesus. It's just that's the concept of the omniscient narrator. But I don't really get these I don't get these complaints about how exactly the movie sucks just because there's little dialogue. Apparently, never ever heard about showing the story instead of telling it. We see the story. We see it through the visuals. Where on the other hand, they use visuals to marinate and mask around the plot inconsistencies. And I'm not talking about Wally. I'm talking about like Michael Bay films where they use visual splendor to mask away the absurdities and inconsistencies with everything else that is wrong with it. Not to mention giving tired narrative exposition. But on Wally's case, it uses narrative to evolve itself around the scene, and the scene is used to explain the narrative. Because we see the world as it is during this time. We don't even need to know that this is taken in the present time because it's in the future. We get to see events unfold through what we can see with our own eyes. And sure, people are more receptive to what people say than what they can see, but in a movie, visuals are everything, and not just for the action set pieces. The visuals itself has to be of a consistent context. For example, like the trash skyscrapers, as I like to call them in the movie. No narrator had to tell us that there were trash. We could see that the land is desolate and it's been abandoned for quite some time because rust has settled all over and paper and whatnot has been dissipated. But I don't really understand how exactly electricity is still running throughout the city. You assume that the generators would have died out at one point, since they're not being maintained by any sort of human race. But I mean, that's a little oversight on the animator's part, and if they were to try to go into detail about that, it wouldn't be extremely important. It wouldn't set the template for the story itself. And the biggest problem that these people have with the dialogue is that it doesn't create the characters that we're supposed to care about. And the two most important ones are Wally and Eve, because despite that they have a sort of language, both of them really just speak in their own names. It's kind of like watching two Pokemon communicate, just saying Pika Pika, Pika Pika. But even then, you can still tell there's a communication going on. Even then, despite the fact. And once again, it's all the visual. You see their personality. They don't have to tell you it. It's not like I'm telling you, well, I'm a sympathetic person, because that doesn't really hold a lot of weight. Because on the other hand, if I'm doing something that doesn't make me seem sympathetic, then I'm just lying, and I'm unsympathetic. But clearly, you saw that because of my actions, not about my words. The whole, actions speak louder than words sort of deal. I mean, you gotta hold your own ground by, falling forward with it. And that's what these two do. That's how we know that Wally is kind and selfless. Not by him saying that he is, even though he can barely even pronounce his own name, but he shows us this by how he acts and reacts to situations. Like, for example, how he accidentally ran over his companion cockroach. He was very concerned. He was worried. He was sad. You could see it in the minuscule squeaks he made of concern. And he didn't say oh, I'm very concerned now. And even then, even if there's a movie that has live action characters reacting in a way that makes them very concerned, most of the time you can't really feel that sympathy. And even for robots, that's quite a feat. And I guess that's also the problem, is that the mere fact that they're robots. These people expect that the AI has to be AI and that they can't be self-aware or whatnot, but I would like to think they would. I know that there's a lot of there could be a lot of problems in the future with AIs being self-aware, because usually we use robots in a way as slaves. But since they don't have a moral principle or a sentience, we don't call it slavery. It's just if I was to use my printer whenever I felt like it. I'm not feeling particularly remorseful for the printer's sake, because the printer doesn't have feelings as far as I can tell. But if there's a robot that does, and that people want to decide that the robot doesn't have any sentiment, the robot's going to be pretty dismissive towards them and resentful and angry. That's what always was frightening about the if anyone knows about the Animatrix, there was a particular series called the Renaissance. That was always what was so frightening to me, was that these robots, when they started to become sentient, that they were being completely misunderstood by the human race, and then they decided to attack in vicious ultimatum because of how the human race had made these robots, how they depended themselves upon these robots so much that once they lost that, they were powerless to them. That was always what was so daunting to me. I'm not saying that the concept of it is bad. It's just there's a lot of questions to be taken into advance, and trying to understand, because when does the robot become sentient enough to realize that it's being told what to do without any principle upon it? And I even made kind of series. I made a prequel fan fiction upon Wall-E, trying to describe how, they're moving beyond the program. That's the whole point of Andrew's. I think Andrew Stanton's line. Love progresses or something like that. Conquers over life's programming. That you can get past that. You can get past being told what to do and just do what you want to do. Wally doesn't always trash compact like he was originally programmed to. He has music. He's playful. He's not playful, but he's undoubtedly curious. He's got his own home. He's got his own human behavior. He puts on his treads like they're like shoes, and he stacks them on the rack just like a human would, and he flicks them off, because he's a human. He has this meticulous priority. You see that. You see you see these little details, and you tell that this robot's more human than you come to be. You don't have to see it. You don't have to hear it from what he says. You don't have to do that. You don't have to have somebody tell you that. You already know. You can see it. You can already see. You can already tell how he reacts and acts to situations, especially at the final act. And spoiler alert. So, like when he sacrifices himself and makes sure that the forgot what it's called, but the lift in the middle, center of the Lido deck, so that the plant could be inserted. And although I know this is an inconsistency because I didn't understand why Eve just didn't have the plant inside of her chest instead of having it held by Wally, who was already injured. But I guess the idea was that since Wally is pretty much a completely fully sentient robot and that he cares, you see the ultimate sacrifice. The sacrifice is the ultimate virtue usually. The sacrifice for the betterment of everyone else, and you do this for everyone else. You don't do it for yourself. And that's a big character development right there. And even then, you didn't even need that to know that he could do something like that. You already had so much sacrifices that he had to make. When, for example, when Eve was temporarily kind of in a coma because she found that plant for the first time, and he's not sure how to deal with this situation. She's kind of just in a coma, so he's trying to take care of her at the expense of his own self. That's a sacrifice. It might not be as ultimate as literally killing yourself for the sake of all mankind, but it is a sacrifice, and I'm pretty sure he can elevate his sacrifice because he's so kind-hearted. And we see that because he reacts to it. He doesn't say, well, I'm going to do this because I'm, selfless. It makes the movie better that way. We get to see it. We don't have to be told how it works. The only parts that have to be told are the parts that haven't, the funny thing is that the only people in this movie who really have to talk a lot are the humans themselves. That have to develop their own character, like Captain McCrea, for example. He's a somewhat of a dim-witted captain. I don't say he's retarded. He's a little challenged, but he's the one who has to tell us because the human race is devolved in such a way that they're blind to pretty much everything around them. They have extreme tunnel vision to the point that they're just pretty much embryos. Pretty much bacteria feasting on, the luxury of everything. They don't get to do things freely as they please. They're just robots. It's funny that the robots are the human beings and that the humans are the robots. They're just living out their day the same way. They never do anything different or new. Strangely enough. And for a human that has to use dialogue to get his emotion and story across really speaks measures about the overall story.